Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this session with Matt Ehret, our geopolitical analyst and historian extraordinaire who is leading us in many, many directions and hopefully is forcing you to think outside the box. And, you don't have to agree with everything, but our goal here is to get you to think because that's probably one of the most important traits we need to embrace again is critical thinking. It's pretty well missing, and probably all the drug use has contributed mightily to that, right? Um, but we've been talking about the tools of the trade for world empire. How do they roll? What is their MO? And hopefully you can see that's alive and well today in America. And I want to move a little bit and talk about present day America and what's going on here. And I think this to me is a really important issue for you all to understand. And Matt, you can talk about this because our nation is absolutely obsessed with creating shortage and scarcity and destroying our resources, except for the oligarchs, right? Because they're the ones that go into Africa and steal all the African countries' resources for themselves. So it's not that they don't like resources, it's just where are they and who can access them. But we see this attack on the food supply, on farmers, the latest, right, from John Kerry. We got to take all the farms because after all that carbon, is going to destroy us. So affecting our agriculture, which is obviously the basis of everything, even in the scriptures, right? The basis of life is producing food. There's nothing more important. And I wrote a whole book on that. So that's another story. But, our ranchers, our meat supply, our energy, nuclear, our, oil and gas. So New Mexico produces a ton of oil and gas. In fact, 50% of our revenues for the state and all the money they waste comes from oil and gas. But of course, now the land commissioner wants to restrict it. No comment. Just all of it, our economic liberties, et cetera. So why this obsession on the destruction of resources and creating scarcity for the American people?
Yeah, well, what you just said and what we were talking about in the previous segment regarding the creation of rules that are not meant to be followed by the rule makers, it flows right into this conversation very nicely. Because the you're right. When you look at the double, if you listen to those who make the policies for euthanasia, population control, population reduction, eating bugs to stop global warming, or things like that, you look at those people who are actually making those policies. The Maurice Strongs, the Klaus Schwabs, and all of their auxiliaries, they themselves don't abide by any of those things. They don't eat bugs. They don't avoid using BMWs that with their multiple chauffeurs and their multiple private jets. They don't avoid any of that. Prince Philip, who founded the World Wildlife Fund with Prince Bernhard, the founder of the Bilderberger Group, back in the early 60s, they didn't stop shooting rare white rhinoceroses on their safaris. They kept doing that stuff. So what is it that they want when they said protect nature from human activity? They mean stop the plebes, the Untermenschen. They see themselves as the Übermenschen, and that's a German term by Nietzsche for the overhumans. That was used at the heart of the Hitlerian philosophy of cosmology. There's the overhumans and the underhumans. The overhumans were those born into the right bloodlines, who were genetically fit to be the masters, and the majority were born into low bloodlines who were genetically predestined to be the slaves, the servant class of a crystallized feudal world structure. That's basically it. There's efforts to try to make this sound scientific. You've got transhumanism. The transhumanists are, when you listen to the speeches by Yuval Harari or some of these freaks at Davos talking about CRISPR technology, they're talking about, how there's been no reason governing the evolution of species for billions of years, and now there is intelligent design for the first time out of the chaos, and the intelligent designers are the CEOs at Davos, he says, who are now going to control the levers of evolution. And he's referring to themselves as the master, the lords, the actual gods that will replace the non-existent gods, apparently, that weren't governing the universe before that. Now it's them. Right. And so they're creating structures that they demand other people follow as we Like they will never voluntarily depopulate themselves. If you say, "Oh, you think we're so overpopulated, would you volunteer to depopulate yourself?" Then, no, of course not. That can't apply to them. They have to lead the depopulation. They can't themselves suffer it, or else what happens to the cause, or whatever is how they justify it.
So, Matt, this is another theme that comes right out of Genesis and early Jewish traditions of a third of the angels falling, right? Second day kind of thought. But they fall because they refuse to feel like they're going to be servants of mankind. So this idea of being overlords over mankind is just perpetuated from the very beginning of our traditions in Judaism and Christianity, Christian thought, all the way through to today. It's a modern day ongoing theme of what took place in the very beginning.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. See, I'm learning as well. I never thought about it that way, but that's a very good point. There are these universal attributes to the oligarchical system that we find embedded in the most ancient of texts.
So then who's influencing them to continue that theme all the way through today?
Well, I think, yeah, definitely the question of pride being at the source of so much sin is a very important idea, because if you can't humble yourself to see that there's something greater than yourself that you have to shape your identity around and serve as a higher truth, then you become that truth. You become the purpose of your own existence, which is absurd. No one created themselves, but those who misstep down that trajectory and make those conclusions end up shaping insipid, poisonous identities that justifies doing a lot of evil, which normal humans with a conscience somewhat intact and half a brain recognizes. No, you don't go down this. You don't overstep these red lines. You don't kill grandma because she's too expensive. You don't do late abortion. It's a bait. Like, you don't kill babies. You don't do those things. Like, that's common sense. And they destroy that human common sense within themselves early on by these false concepts and false passions that emerge out of that sense of I am God. Yeah.
Yeah, total control. Well, and along those lines too, because I don't want to forget to ask you this question, but because it's clear, and I don't know where the switch got turned on. It just the structure here of I don't think, I mean, the government isn't running the show, the corporations are. And I don't know how the hierarchical order works. I mean, people argue, are the Rockefellers at the top? Are the Rothschilds at the top? Is Soros at the top? Who knows? But really, it's clear to me, everything is being run through the corporations now. So, I mean, this is fascism on steroids, you could say, this marrying between the state. But the state has really kind of lost its power and is subservient to the corporation. So do you know where, like, when did that really, is that because we sent all our manufacturing to China back in the 70s? I mean, where did that do you think that might have started?
Okay, well, the prototype for the modern era of this, of corporate fascism, which was attempted, I mean, that was Mussolini's corporate fascism, it's corporatism. Hitler's entire war machine was made possible by the DuPont Standard Oil, Rockefeller Standard Oil. Oh no, Jewish Rockefeller. Well,
and Prescott Bush.
And Prescott Bush, Union Banking, Brown Brothers, the entire funding of eugenics, the religious, a pseudoscience religion for the Nazi masterclass of Übermenschen. All of this was brought to us by the City of London bankers, British intelligence, a lot of American industrialists and bankers. But again, that precedent was itself set earlier by, I think, the international corporatism of the British East India Company that had merged with the Dutch East India Company in the 17th century as private corporations with boards of directors that had more power than most governments of the world. They were globally extended by the end of the 18th century and throughout the 19th. They interfaced very closely with the City of London, which back then, just like today, was the nerve center of global finance. The world's first private central banking system was set up as the Bank of Amsterdam in 1609, which interfaced closely with the Dutch East India Company, which converted a republican spirit of the Netherlands, which was anti-imperial. Originally, the Netherlands was an anti-Habsburg bastion of resistance, right? The Flemish resistance fighters, the stories of, I mean, there's so many stories that we know of. regarding the freedom-loving republicanism of the Dutch. That was a hotbed of creativity, Renaissance science in the 16th century. That had to be crushed and corrupted by the creation of the Dutch Stock Exchange, the Bank of Amsterdam. And that was done as the Venetian center of command took over and infiltrated and destroyed this hotbed of creative love and creative freedom from within. And through that, these structures were then shaped that integrated with Britain, which was another hotbed under Shakespeare, Erasmus, Thomas More of Renaissance Christian humanism, not Bertrand Russell humanism, the good kind. That had to be then destroyed from within with the Bank of England and the Dutch takeover of William of Orange and the Glorious Revolution. So you had then the merger of this international behemoth. And these oligarchs, these inbred oligarchs sitting within the European nobility, the black nobility, were always kind of working together, even if somewhere within the Habsburgs, somewhere within the French, somewhere within the British or Dutch empires. They all kind of work together for a common end of keeping the system in a state of constant warfare, constant depopulation. Don't permit your slaves, the slave class, to access certain sets of ideas that make them too unwieldy. Right. Control the resources, make sure that everyone stays within a certain acceptable set of resources or technologies that don't allow them to break free of what we have monopolized. Certain techniques like that are always useful. Divide to conquer. So that was what America broke away from when you had the American founding fathers doing what they did. It wasn't just to not pay taxes on tea or something. It was for a much, much higher reason to create a new type of society that rejects hereditary power and provides for a system of economy and politics that were premised on the idea that all men are created equal, made in the image of a creator. That is why we all have rights. They're not given to us by an elite. They're born with us by being human. And the general welfare principle of the Constitution is a very important concept, that no law is just if it acts only in the service of an elite or a private class, but for all. That's what makes laws good or legitimate. Otherwise, it's a form of violence, which was proven by St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas earlier on, an unjust law. And Martin Luther King used that point when he said, it's good to go to jail for some things. If the thing that the law is an unjust law and is being used to defend only a tyrant class, then it's actually more just to go to jail and that's what Christ did too, right? There's laws of certain people within the Pharisees that he was breaking, or in certain laws within Rome that he actually said they should pay Caesar what Caesar's, but there are certain rules of conduct anyway that were being broke. So all that to say, when this thing took over really was over JFK's dead body and Bobby Kennedy's dead bodies, who were trying to revive what the U.S. created, which was a system that saw the sovereign nation state, the republic, as being that which sets the pace for the private corporate part of society. It's good to have corporations, private enterprises, good. All of these things are fine, but they can't shape the government as the instrument of the private class. That's the difference, right? The government has to say, okay, we have this, there's going to be a water crisis in California in 30 years, which was what JFK was looking at and giving speeches about. He's like, well, if we don't figure out a way to manage continental water, that's going to cause a lot of death unnecessarily. So let's act today to help the future children who are not even born yet have a better life. What
a novel idea.
Huh?
What a novel idea.
What a novel idea. That's the basis for natural law and what gives a government viability. And that's why he had to be killed by this whole nest of death cultists that were emerging around Allen Dulles within the CIA that were trying to take control of the reins of government. And unfortunately, I think the consummation of that was largely in 1971 when Kissinger and, the Trilateral Commission was being brought online. Kissinger, David Rockefeller's Zbigniew Brzezinski and others were taking over. Nixon wasn't a bad guy, but he didn't know what the hell was going on half the time. He was super naive on that. And as this instrument was taking over, they floated the US dollar. They got rid of the gold reserve, the fixed exchange rate that made speculating on currencies impossible in the 50s and 60s. The fixed exchange rate was broken. That gave the oligarchic class an ability to now conduct a new form of warfare against nations that had formerly suffered for centuries under colonialism. And now you could break them economically by speculating against their currencies, which is what new creatures of the system like George Soros were created to do and deployed, like a new pirate class, always under the behest and service of his masters. Evelyn de Rothschild provided him the seed capital to create Quantum Hedge Fund in 1968, which then ran amok on third world countries, destroying their currencies whenever a country in Africa or something, or Asia, didn't want to go along with being a new slave society. A Soros was deployed to destroy their currencies, reabsorb them back into the game, and then use them to loot for the mother country, right? The new consumer class of people that would no longer produce but would just consume. And to be a good citizen in America or Canada, we were told, go to the shopping mall. That you're not going to have factories or manufacturing anymore. You're going to be the consumer society, and then you'll have the dirty people who will stay poor doing sweatshops and cheap labor, and they will be the producers who will stay too poor to buy what they make.
And that we say illegal immigration.
Yeah, exactly. We made their lives so unbearable, so unlivable by destroying the basis of their country's existence by either this form of economic warfare or just bombing them back to the Stone Age, like we did to Libya or Iraq. We just destroyed them. So we made their lives so unlivable that then they were forced to try to find a better way, which involves them now being used by those same oligarchs to disrupt the nation states within Europe, within America, right? Because people in Mexico would generally much rather, if they had the choice, live in Mexico if a future were provided for them. But we destroyed their life.
All those Latin American countries, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, El Salvador, they would rather they would rather not have Wall Street supported drug lords managing.
I'd rather live in El Salvador with the current president.
Well, yeah, that's true. No, he's doing pretty good. Yeah, that's a good point. But yeah,
so we don't have a whole lot of time, and we want to end it because we need hope. And so the question comes, how are we going to save this dying republic? And I would argue, we have in our DNA, a constitutional foundation, freedom, our history, all these things, and that's significant. And that is one of my hopes that doesn't disappear. You talked about, I don't remember, I read an article, I think it was about Rembrandt, I could be wrong, about Christ's life and mission representing a moral power of change, which had the unique capacity to undo the foundations of the Roman Empire. And you basically boiled it down to turning the hearts and minds of suppressed people to the power of forgiveness, loving all, including one's enemies, and adhering to one's conscience before all political norms of acceptable behavior demanded by the Roman oligarchy. And I think that's great, because I think that's the truth. That I see that the New Testament really is a Exodus 2.0, that Yeshua, Jesus, is kind of replaying Moses and personifying Israel. And the New Testament has shifted to the new Exodus. The New Testament is now the new Exodus, this deliverance from tyranny, of course, from Egypt, and Moses being the leader of that. And what is he? The meekest of man on the earth. And then we see Yeshua come with in humility and forgiveness and turning the other cheek and loving your enemies, and that these become the culmination of where we need to be is under to me, the Sermon on the Mount. That's the key. The Torah now kind of shifts. The top of the mountain in Sinai becomes the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus imparts these principles. And they're not just individual, they are for a people group throughout the Roman Empire to push back against Rome, but it's everything 180 degrees opposite of world empire. So, and if we could just kind of close out, give us some of the high points here. How will we save this dying republic?
Well, yeah, I think going back to Machiavelli is an interesting character, and one thing about his prince, he never intended for that to be published. That was very specific to one particular Italian prince that was doing battle with the Venetian oligarchy in 1509. That was trying to destroy, basically, the center of global Satanism was, at the time, the heirs of the Roman Empire, the Roman Imperium, which was Venice. And Venice was organizing forever wars. So Machiavelli wrote something called the Discourses on Livy. And in the Discourses on Livy, it's his analysis of how Rome could have saved itself after Cicero was killed, or even before the Punic Wars. He does like a deep dive, kind of like what St. Augustine does in the city of God. He does, that's sort of Machiavelli's discourses on Livy. And he makes the point, well, what caused Rome to slide, to lose its moral viability that it had still when it was a republic, as it became and transitioned into an empire? And the key moment, just like in the case of Athens earlier, was when Cicero was killed, and sort of a similar moment that even sparked its downfall even further was when John the Baptist was killed. But you lose your moral, these are people who are infusing, and Christ, obviously, but you infuse, these are characters. Socrates is sort of the conscience of his society, trying to be a sacred memory keeper of the times when Athens was still good, was still a lover of freedom, would help its neighbors. And when they killed Socrates by forcing him to take the hemlock by the Democratic Party of Athens, they sort of like really embraced their destiny of being a backstabbing imperium, and led to their own downfall. Same thing Cicero was, just trying to warn. Look, read Cicero's Republic. It's his Commonwealth is his assessment of how we were corrupted by going into the Punic Wars unnecessarily. We shouldn't have done it. We shouldn't have destroyed Carthage. And we lost our moral mandate of heaven by doing that. So this is what Machiavelli's doing. And he makes the point, unless a society in the decline, in a corrupt decline, is able to rediscover its founding principles, it is destined to be self-destroyed. So you have to revisit your founding principles and look to see, well, what made it work? What allowed America to overcome its greatest challenges, both in the miracle of its victory over the British Empire, when a bunch of farmers were able to carry out this battle, farmers against the most organized, global, disciplined military force. How did that happen? And, there's a story that's self-promo, that Clash of the Two Americas Volume 1, I try to make the point in the first chapter. It was because you had an organized network of collaborators in Russia, in India, Muslim India. The Hyder Ali rebellion with Tipu Sultan were working together with writing letters to the Continental Congress in 1780, saying your fight is our fight against the British Empire. The French, the Irish, the Polish, were all working together. It was an international fight to break humanity as a whole free of the system of hereditary power and usher in a new age where we would recognize that we were all made in the image of God. And despite our religious differences, linguistic differences, we all had to make our intercourse with our neighbors based upon a respect for the sacredness of life that we could all agree upon, a better world for our children who are unborn, and make that the basis of our international law. That's what John Quincy Adams later on called the community of principle as the basis of his foreign policy, right? It was the idea of a society that would be based upon working in common moral principles despite our differences, and respect our differences. Don't go and don't create wars over our different names we give to God. We fall right into the oligarchy's designs whenever we do that. It never works for us ever. And we find we get better over time when we are reminded of the humanity of our neighbor. And so I think that we're in a sort of similar situation today, where America has made these miraculous leaps, overcoming the challenges and the traps that were set for them. But here we are today now, a few decades into our deep corruption. And the consequences is collapse on every level, moral, economic, you name it. We're going into a war policy with Russia and China. I mean, like all of this stuff. So we have to really revisit what made it work. And I mean, when you look at Donald Trump today is somebody who I do still see with the MAGA movement as representing the only thing that is viable inside of inside of the United States, which has called for having dialogue with countries that we are otherwise being pushed by Biden to go to war with, against China, against Russia, against other countries, Iran. We need to have a dialogue amongst these different cultures in order to set a new economic architecture in place that will be based upon the principles of American national banking, the U.S. constitutional industrial banking that would allow us to rebuild Buffalo, Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia, Detroit, Windsor, Ontario, all of the parts of our society that we destroyed under 50 years of globalization. We have to rebuild, retool the automotive sector, rebuild our means of production to support ourselves under a new way of thinking about banking that would put people in prison, as they should be, for gambling with other people's money or doing derivative gambling, which you would go to jail.
Brother. You want to
Yeah,
run
back
for
in the 50s,
president?
you would go to jail for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But that's the truth. Everything you're saying, we need to empower people to the same degree that we're encouraging their morality, their ethics.
Yeah, yeah,
And in
you
doing
you
so, that's what's going to change everything.
Yeah, it's
yeah,
the only
exactly.
hope.
Yeah.
And we're it. I mean, we have to model that behavior in the marketplace, in our communities. And, I could summarize this by saying we're all farmers now, because that may be the only hope of getting, of building a self-reliant people. And at this juncture, it looks like the only place you're going to build that kind of people is in the rural areas, right? Out of the cities. Back to sort of simple day by day living, learning. I mean, I'm trying to grow stuff. I'm not very good at it because I come from a long line of Jewish doctors and lawyers who don't know the first things. They don't camp, or they don't, so that's been a challenge. But, no one is coming to save us. None of us chose this. And so, it's a make or break moment. And, my prayer is constantly that people would just wake up and invest in their community, starting, invest in your family, in your local community, in your city, run for office if that's what's needed. We need good people everywhere, serving everywhere. Rick, we just have 1 minute left. Rick, if you have anything you want to say, and
This is really about rewarding those that have rewarding people as they rise in their ethical responsibility within their structure of civilization. In doing so, rewarding them will set a new standard for what's acceptable and what's not. In doing that, we will remove to some degree this power grab, greed, the whole thing. And so that these companies don't feel like they're the ones running the show. The government doesn't feel like they can do whatever they want without the people's permission or votes. And because the people have become a righteous people, we have to get back to that rewarding for good behavior.
Yeah.
No
That's
more
good.
goodness. Matt, anything to close? We got like 30 seconds or so.
No, what you guys said is fine. I do think we have to still wield the power of the nation state as a weapon of defense of humanity. The nation state is something that the oligarchy has been trying to destroy for a long time. And it's because they know that there's a power that the people can wield with that tool, both in defense of ourselves and in offense against them, against the oligarchy itself. So I think we should be always focused on also thinking on the local level at the same time as we think on the top-down level too, about recapturing the nation state and using it properly. Yeah.
Amen. And, technically or non-technically speaking, Israel was kind of functioned in that way, that First Nation state. And what did God establish with them? Borders and boundaries, guardrails to protect the people. And that within those boundaries, whether you're in the temple or whatever, the place of prosperity and growth and producing and, pushing back the chaos. Anytime you built a structure like that, a temple in the ancient world, that was how you pushed back the chaos. So we need to push back the chaos. So protect your gates, your borders of yourself, your boundaries, what you say, what you speak, what you see. That's really important. And then work towards protecting your community. And really, we need to protect our nation. However that's going to work is another story. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. We want to thank you, Matt Ehret, for your time here. And you shared a lot. We're going to have to go back and process, right? This is good. So thanks for joining Dr. Rick and I here on Israel TV Network on Uncensored News. Shalom, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.